Well, how do we actually go about graphing rational functions? So these are the steps that we have to graph a rational function. The very first thing that we want to do is find all the x-intercepts. Well, how do you find x-intercepts? Well, you set the numerator equal to 0 and solve for x. Next, we're going to find the y-intercept. Well, how do you find y-intercepts? You plug in 0 for x and solve, finding f of 0. After we found the x and the y-intercepts, the next step is going to be to find all the asymptotes. So we're going to find the vertical and the horizontal asymptote, and we do that just like we did in the video before. So we're going to find all the asymptotes. Fourth step is going to be that we're going to determine whether or not we actually cross that horizontal asymptote. Fifth step, we're going to put all of these things on the graph. We're going to put all our points, all our asymptotes, everything on the graph. Step 6, from each one of those sections, because that's really going to break us up into sections, we're going to choose a test pointer, a test value, a number within each one of those sections. We're actually going to figure out, okay, what's happening to the graph at these points? And that's going to help us determine our shape and our location for the graph. Finally, we're going to connect the points with a smooth curve. I just want to take a look here. Now notice this is 7 steps, so it might seem like a lot, but I'm going to ask you when you're graphing these things to tell me the x-intercept, the y-intercept, the vertical, the horizontal asymptote, and the point at which you cross the horizontal asymptote. Well, that is the first 4 things. So the first 4 things that I have, the first 4 steps, you're going to be asked to find this. And step 5 really is to plot all that stuff. So you really only need to remember, okay, 6 and 7. 7's to connect. So the biggest thing to remember here is 6. Obviously, you have to remember the process of how to do all these things, but they will be mapped out when you're asked a question. So let's actually graph this first example. F of x is equal to 4 over x minus 2. Step 1, find the x-intercepts. So I set the numerator, which happens to be 4, equal to 0, and I solve for x. Well, this doesn't have an x, right? 4 doesn't equal 0. So since that doesn't make any sense, we write none. That means we don't cross the x-axis. We don't have an x-intercept. Then a y-intercept. Well, how do you find the y-intercept? Again, you plug in 0 for x. So I'm finding f of 0, which means 4 over 0 minus 2. Well, 0 minus 2 is negative 2, so 4 over negative 2 is negative 2. Well, I'm going to write this as an ordered pair, so we end up with 0, negative 2. Step 3, vertical asymptote. Remember, when you're finding vertical asymptotes, what do you got to be? You have to be in lowest terms. So can I get this in lowest terms? Well, cannot factor this, so I'm already in lowest terms, so don't have to worry about that. So to find the vertical asymptote, we set the denominator x minus 2 equal to 0, solve for x. We end up with x equal to 2. So that means that I'm going to have a vertical asymptote at x equal 2. Horizontal asymptotes are next. How do you find horizontal asymptotes? Well, we looked at the degree. Well, what is the degree of the numerator? Well, the degree of the numerator, we just have a 4, so that would be 0 because we have 0 x's there. What about the degree of the denominator? Well, the degree of the denominator, we have an x to the first power, so that would be 1. So looking at this, the degree of the numerator is smaller, and that was option A. Well, option A told us we automatically had a horizontal asymptote at y equals 0. Finally, we need to figure out, do we cross the horizontal asymptote? Well, how do we do that? Now, that's the new stuff, the stuff that I said we were going to get to. Well, what I said is you're going to set the reduced function equal to the horizontal asymptote and solve for x. So I'm going to set the reduced function, well, I couldn't reduce this function, so it's just going to be 4 over x minus 2 equal to the horizontal asymptote. Well, what's the horizontal asymptote? It's 0. So I'm going to set 4 divided by x over 2 equal to 0 and solve for x. Well, if I put the 0 over 1, I can cross multiply, so I get 4 is equal to, well, 0 times x minus 2 is just going to be 0. Well, does 4 equal 0? No, there's no variable there, there's no x to solve, so this doesn't make any sense. Well, that means we do not cross the horizontal asymptote. Alright, so this was step 1, 2, 3, and 4. Step 5 was plot all this stuff. So I don't have an x-intercept, so I can't put anything there. Y-intercept is 0, negative 2, so 0, negative 2, there's the dot for the y-intercept. Vertical asymptote at x equal 2. Alright, horizontal asymptote at y equals 0, so let's go ahead and do that. And that's it. That's all the information that I have. So now we're on that step 6. The step 6 that was asking us to take a look and see each section that we've broken our graph into, pull an x value out of it. Alright, well, let's take a look at what I'm talking about here. I need x values, right? So this is my x-axis, this horizontal thing here. So I have no idea what's happening on this part of the graph. The first dot that I get to is that dot right there, that purple dot. Well, what is the value of that purple dot? Well, the value of that purple dot is 0. So that means that between negative infinity and 0, I don't know what's going on with this graph. So I need to figure out what's going on between those points. Well, give me a number between negative infinity and 0. I'm going to pick negative 2. Could have picked any number, but I'm going to pick negative 2 because negative 2 is the number between negative infinity and 0. Well, then where else? Okay, well, I know what happens at 0, and again, I know what happens at x equal 2. I have a vertical asymptote, but right here in between 0 and 2, I have no idea what's going on with this graph. So I need to pick a number between 0 and 2. What's a number between 0 and 2? 1. All right, well then let's keep going. I knew what happened at x equal 2, but if you look here, I have absolutely no idea what happens between 2 and infinity. So I need to pick some number between 2 and infinity. So between 2 and infinity, I'm going to pick the number 3. All right, let's make a table with these values and find out what happens. So I'm going to write x and f of x. So x and f of x. So my 3 points are negative 2, 1, and 3. So negative 2, 1, and 3. And I need to plug this in and solve for the function. And I'm going to do this with a calculator. And the reason that I'm going to do it with the calculator is that right now what's most important is learning how to graph the rational functions, not recalling how to deal with fractions. So we're going to just use a calculator for this. So I'm just going to use the little scientific calculator that's here with the computer. So I need to divide 4 by, and instead of x, I'm going to plug in a negative 2. So 4 divided by, and since it's all in the denominator, put parentheses, and then this is 2 negative, that's how I have to do a negative 2, and then minus 2, and hit enter. I end up with negative 1. So I know that when x is negative 2, my f of x is equal to negative 1. So I know I have the point negative 2, negative 1 right there. What about 1? Same thing, plug it into the calculator. So I'm going to have 4 divided by, open my parentheses, 1 minus 2. So 1 minus 2, I end up getting, when I hit enter, negative 4. So I have the point 1, negative 4 right there. What about 3? Again, grab the calculator. 4 divided by, instead of x, over here I'm going to write 3. 3 minus 2. So I hit enter and I end up with 4. So when x is 3, f of x is equal to 4 right there. Well, those are all the points that I need to graph this. Now I just have to connect my dots and then understand asymptotes. So I have a set of dots over here and a dot over on the other side. So let's go ahead and connect the set of dots on the left hand side. So if I connect these 3 dots, where do I go? How do I go from here? Well, I know how asymptotes works. My graph wants to get really close to this asymptote. I know I don't cross any of these asymptotes because one, I never crossed that vertical asymptote, and I figured out that I don't cross my horizontal asymptote. So what I need to do is I need to get my graph really close to the asymptotes. So this is what I look like on the left. Well, on the right hand side, again, I need to figure out what's going on. I only have one dot, but we know that our graph wants to get close to the asymptotes. So over here to the left, I want to go up, so my graph is trying to get close to it. And then over here, I'm trying to beam y equals 0. So I'm trying to get close to y equals 0. So this magenta line is the graph of 4 over x minus 2. The next video, we'll look at the next 2 examples.